What the f?
All right, so I'm here with my new 2003 Honda Pilot. I found this on OfferUp, just like the last vehicle I purchased to flip. OfferUp has kind of become the new Craigslist because Craigslist has almost nothing on it anymore since they started charging the post, and Facebook Marketplace is always just garbage by wannabe flippers. So I've been going to OfferUp lately when I'm not going to the auctions, and I've been finding some great deals on there. This is a one-owner Pilot with 134,000 miles. It's a little rough, but I know what the problem is with it. I came and looked at it a couple days ago, brought my scan tool, pulled the codes. I actually used to own a 2003 Pilot. I don't think I ever put it on any of my channels because I thought it was such an uninteresting vehicle, but it was a good little SUV for me for a while, and I had the exact same problem with my Pilot. At least I'm hoping that's what it is, with the throttle position sensor. And the symptoms that the owner described and the way that it's running, when I took a look at it, I have to believe it's the same issue. When the TPS goes bad on these Pilots, they'll run very rough, they'll misfire. They won't want to shift, and some of you are going to right away want to say, oh, it's got to be the transmission. It's an 03 Pilot. The transmission's had issues in 2002 and 2003. You are correct. However, based on the service history of this vehicle, which despite its cosmetic condition, it's been dealer serviced, transmission fluid changes regularly. Based on the fact that there's no transmission codes, the fluid looks good. You can tell it's not a recent change, but it's not burnt or discolored. And based on the other symptoms the vehicle's having and throwing a TPS sensor code and the way it was driving that the owner described to me, I am very, very, very confident it's the throttle position sensor causing it to act the way it's acting. And at the price I'm paying, I'm more than willing to take the risk. I am getting this Pilot for $250. I'm waiting on the owner right now to come back with the papers. I offered her $150. But I looked at it 2 days ago, and she wasn't quite down for that offer. She had actually been offered over $300 from the local junkyard, and I believe her because they'll pay pretty good money, LKQ, for junk cars. But being that she's the original owner, she did want to see this thing live on, and obviously my intention is to fix it, so that made her feel pretty good. And I said, look, you know, there's a lot of risk here. It could have a bad transmission. So for me, I have to be a little bit lower than the junkyard because I'm going to still have to do the papers in this vehicle if I end up wanting to junk it. So I'd be breaking even, plus my time of getting it out of here. So $250 is what we finally agreed to. Has cold AC, all the windows work, only 134,000 miles, like I said. Plenty of good service history. It's got a brand new Honda battery in it. It's got decent Michelins all around. So there's a lot of positives going for it, but there is certainly some negatives in the cosmetic department. She should be here any minute now. We're to go ahead and do the papers. And then what I'm hoping to do is go get the part right away, come back here. It's kind of left here at an auto shop where she took it in, had it diagnosed, and she ended up just going out and buying a new car. I actually know the owners of this shop. They're very old school. They work on a lot of older vehicles, and I think this was just something they didn't even want to deal with. They just told her it had electrical issues. I saw the printout they gave her. It doesn't even specify the throttle position sensor, which came up right away on my code reader, along with the multiple misfires, 1 through 6, all 6 cylinders misfiring. Again, all very common with a bad TPS. I don't think they wanted to even touch this thing. They work on 60s muscle cars and stuff here, and they let her put it back here. And it's been here for who knows how long. She bought a new car, so I'm hoping to get the part, come back here, and go ahead and throw the part in. Hopefully it'll run well enough to drive it home. I think she's here now. I'm gonna go ahead and go deal with the paperwork, and I'll be back with you guys shortly. All right, so the deal is done, $250. The owner just left. She's a real nice woman, and she's very, very happy that I got this car, that I'm gonna fix it up versus it just going to the crusher. You know, it certainly does need a lot of TLC, but she was the original owner. She bought it off the showroom floor. I have the window sticker and everything. So she bought it right on this road, matter of fact, here on US 1, about 10 minutes down the road. So this vehicle is a Always been a Miami vehicle, and the paint certainly shows that. It's clearly never been garaged, and the heat has gotten to some things, as it seems to do down here. But I want to show you guys just how badly this thing is running. So you can hear it struggles to even, it's running pretty darn bad. It does get better as it warms up. One of the things I noticed the other day, and it could certainly be contributing to the way it's running, is you can hear a hissing like a vacuum leak. Let's just pop this hood open and it just shut off. So again, it struggles to stay running. Now let's try that again. It's running very, very rich. Now, I don't know if you can hear that hissing, but I certainly can. So we probably got a big vacuum leak somewhere that's not helping with this. But she's running real bad, and she needs motor mounts and stuff as well, which on these Hondas, it's all very easy stuff to do. That motor mount you can see is gone, but she's not having a good time. And you can see, even just trying to rev it, it'll pretty much die. All right, so just as a quick test, a quick field test, I unplugged the throttle position sensor cable from the throttle position sensor, and you can see it's running just the same as it was before. Now obviously, if that wasn't the issue, we should be experiencing different symptoms. I will say it's actually running a little bit better, it seems. I can actually give this thing some throttle, which I couldn't do before. So that leads me to believe that's most likely our issue. And it idles a lot better too. I mean, look at that. Huge improvement right away. Let's see what happens if I plug it in. Well, no change, but already a massive improvement the way this thing is running. Look. Huge improvement. So we're getting somewhere, but I'm going to do a little more troubleshooting because, like I said, right off the bat, we're already running a lot better here. So, just by unplugging that. So I'm going to do some more field tests here and see if I can get this thing running well enough and I can just drive it home and drive it out of here and work on it at home instead of in somebody's parking lot. All right, so just a few hours after purchasing the Pilot, I'm already over at the junkyard, and this is a new arrival, so all the parts are fresh and unpicked. 03 Pilot. Right, first thing I notice off the bat is the driver's bottom seat cushion, which mine is all torn up, is in perfect condition. The passenger's is not. There is several other Pilots here, so I'll poke around, see if I can find a good passenger. I should be able to find a good passenger cover easier than a good driver. So I'm happy to see this. I'm obviously going to pull this cushion today. The important thing is getting it running and running well. This engine has not been touched. It still has the beauty cover on it. And this was in an accident, which is what I wanted to see, because it probably means it was running and driving just fine and ended up at the junkyard because it was crashed and not because it had a mechanical issue. So I'm guessing that the TPS and the map sensor on this engine are fine. I'll probably just pull the whole throttle body off, and that way I don't have to deal with those screws, having to chisel them and pull them out. Just swap throttle bodies, because you never know, I could have an issue with my throttle body as well. It's contributing to all the problems. That's why we have a map issue and a TPS issue. Could be the throttle body itself. So I'm going to pull the whole throttle body off this thing. And anything else, like I said, the seat cushion, hopefully this. I may even buy the beauty cover. My engine's missing it. I think it'd make it look more complete. I usually hate to buy so many parts straight away, but I'm not even sure if I can fix the vehicle yet, but I'm fairly confident that's going to fix the issue based on just unplugging the TPS sensor and having it run so much better immediately. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right, so I'm back from the junkyard. The throttle body, I ended up buying the whole throttle body off that first Pilot, and I'm glad I pulled this because all the other Pilots were missing their throttle body. They had a totally different one. They gave it to me for the same price, even with the map sensor, the throttle position sensor already on there. So that worked out for me pretty well. And again, like I mentioned, the vehicle this came out of was a wrecked vehicle. I'm assuming it was running when it was wrecked and running decently enough that it was driving down the road to get in an accident. So as you can see, I need to clean this throttle blade here. It's very, very sticky. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. Then I'm gonna drive over to the Pilot, throw this in, and hopefully that's the fix. Okay, so I'm here at the Pilot. I pulled it out of that shop's parking lot because I don't want any problems with them. So now I'm out in the street on public parking, and I'm gonna go ahead and swap out the throttle body. It's 4 12mm bolts, and I'm trying to remember what else I had to pull off at the junkyard. I think that's pretty much it. So I gotta unhook the throttle cables, unhook a couple of these hoses, and pop off whatever remaining electrical connectors I have here, and this should just slide right off. All right, so it's only been a few minutes, and I've already seen one cockroach. I'm wondering if that's the real reason this woman decided to get rid of this car. They're small ones, but not what you want to see when you're inside or working on a vehicle. But anyway, I've already got the old throttle body out. It's very quick. 4 bolts, couple of hoses, couple of connectors. Here it is down here on the ground. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw the new one on. I'm going to have to steal a hose off of this, or I have a couple extra ones in my truck. And hopefully, crossing my fingers, that's the fix. Yeah, we're not going to have any of that. All right, so I have it all back together. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm hoping this works. New throttle body with the, when I say new, you know, junkyard throttle body with the map sensor, with the TPS. These two are throwing codes, if you remember. Everything's hooked up, every hose, vacuum line, bolt nut, throttle cables, so she should be ready to start. I reconnected the battery. Time to enter the Roach coach. Give her a crank and see what happens. Okay, well, I hate to say it. It's running just as it did before. Almost worse, so I don't understand. Change the TPS. Now, could it be a bad replacement TPS? It could, but I think that's far-fetched. I mean, it should at least run a little bit differently. Man, it won't even stay running. It's just like before. Something else is going on here. I think there's a different issue somewhere. Perhaps the mechanics at this shop even took off this connection, the TPS. I know this throttle cable thing was out of here. It was loose. So again, I didn't think anything of it before, but maybe they were messing around with this, and that's why I threw a code for the TPS. Because I don't believe it was, I think it might have been a pending and not an active code. I don't quite remember. I mean, the symptoms seemed so TPS-like based on owning a Pilot before that I just said, that's gotta be it. And went out and got the parts. Didn't do me any good. Good news is I can return all this. Obviously, I can't get my time back of pulling it, which wasn't that much. It's not a huge deal. I can return that, get my money back. But before I do that, I'm gonna dig a little bit deeper into this thing. All right, so interestingly, I unplugged all 3 ignition coils on this bank, started it back up. It's running just the same. So I'm starting to wonder if we have multiple bad coils, and that's what's causing this thing to run as poorly as it is. Because to be honest, the way it's running right now reminds me of the way my pickup truck was running, my F-150 7700, which had just a multiple misfire code for years. It would run terribly, have the same rich smell, and I mean, it would run better than this, but pretty close to as bad. It was running awful, smelled like it was running rich, and for the longest time I couldn't figure out what the problem was. I threw a bunch of parts at it, and then one day I finally got it to throw a code for ignition coil, and it was for cylinder 2 and cylinder like 8. And it finally threw 2, and I changed those 2 ignition coils, and it ran perfectly. So it's day 2 or 3. I don't really remember when I bought this thing. I bought it yesterday, so day 2. And I towed it over to my shop this morning. I had it towed over because it's an all-wheel drive. I didn't use my dolly, so I sucked it up, called a flatbed, paid the money to get it over here, and that way I can actually work on it properly here at my shop. I've been doing some more diagnosing, really going through all the live data with my computer hooked up, and I believe at this point it either needs a valve adjustment, which is a pretty typical thing on these 3.5 Honda engines. I took off this cover earlier. I actually had taken it off yesterday, right after I bought the truck, but I didn't have anything to clean it with, so I just took a screwdriver and very carefully scraped away some of the crud in there that was clogging up all the EGR ports and valleys in there. Well, today I took it off again, and my buddy Oleg, the guy I sold the GS300 to, he came over, him and I together really cleaned that thing up nice. It's like brand new in there, because the code I'm getting, again, now that I've had more time to digest all the information that my scan tool is giving me, the only code that I'm getting that's relevant to what's going on is P1399, I believe that's the code, which is the problem. The reason I never looked into it is on my scan tool, it says a wheel speed sensor. So obviously I wasn't concerned with a wheel speed sensor when I'm trying to get this thing sorted out, you know, mechanically, engine-wise first. But whenever we would rev up the engine, it would keep the check engine light would flash, and I keep getting that P1399. I go, well, it doesn't make sense for the check engine light to flash for a wheel speed sensor, because obviously a flashing check engine light's for a misfire. So I actually Googled 1399, and lo and behold, it's not for a wheel speed sensor. At least in a Honda Pilot, that code is to signify a misfire, and it's not a PO300 code, which would be just a multiple random misfire. Oh boy, we got a cat fight going on somewhere over here. They're all getting impatient because I haven't fed them yet. But with this engine, that code, at least and I researched it quite a bit, it can be two things. It can either be the EGR needs to be cleaned, or it can be that the vehicle needs a valve adjustment and the clearance is off, and that's why this thing is running like absolute garbage. Now, before I spend the 4+ hours tearing down the top end of this motor to do a valve adjustment, I figured I'd try one more thing with the EGR system. I went out to the auto parts store and I bought a brand new EGR valve, because again, I just cleaned these ports up here on top of the intake, but there still is this component to the EGR system, the EGR valve, and I'm guessing if this was as dirty as it was, which it was pretty clogged up, this could be dirty as well. So I got this with a 20% off discount. It was only 63 bucks, so not terrible. Not something, you know, typically you guys see me go to the junkyard to get everything, sensors, solenoids, even brake boosters, things like that. But if there's one thing I won't buy used, it's an EGR valve. Now obviously I could have got the rebuild kit and cleaned this apart, or the servicing kit I should say, but for an extra $30, this one's ready to drop in. It's worth a shot for the 60 and change to see if changing the EGR valve itself causes it to run better. If not, then I'll proceed to do a valve adjustment. It can't hurt it. Again, at some point, all these engines need it. Okay, new EGR in. I mean, it's definitely still running terrible, but it did seem to, when it started up, it seemed to idle a lot better. I mean, it might have needed that new EGR anyway. I mean, see, that's a lot smoother of an idle than I had before. Way smoother. So I'm going to go ahead and keep the new EGR. It certainly seems to have helped a little bit. Again, not the root of the problems, but that's a much smoother idle than I had before. It was really choking and struggling before. That's not so bad. Now you can still hear that suction. Oleg's really convinced this thing needs an idle air control valve. It's not throwing a code for one, so I don't know what to think. It's definitely running different. Again, not like good, but different. So the new EGR made a difference for sure. But, you know, we're still stumbling here. All right, so I've been doing some more browsing and thinking over the evening. This is now day 3 of owning the Pilot. You know, still stumped on this P1399 code. I really don't want to go for the valve adjustment until I'm 100% sure that's the problem, because it seems like when people need a valve adjustment on this vehicle, it's not running as horribly as it is. Usually there isn't even any signs of a misfire. It's just the code that won't go away. And maybe the engine's a little clattery, but this thing is misfiring real rough. It's clearly running rich. And you can see I pulled all 6 spark plugs just now, and they look like newer plugs, but they are fouled up pretty badly. Some not so bad, some of them are really soaked. So I'm not sure if we got bad injectors here. We know for sure by looking at the fuel trim on my live data on my little scan tool that the fuel trims are very, very high. Obviously this control valve here for the air is sucking in way too much air. So I don't know if this thing's computer is just scrambled and it's dumping too much air, too much fuel. I don't know what's going on, but I think the first simple test to do, since it only takes a few minutes to take these spark plugs and coils out, is to clean out these plugs, put them back in, and see how it runs. See if it runs smooth, and obviously it'll foul up very quickly, but if it starts running smooth again, then we know the issue shouldn't be a valve adjustment. It should be maybe a leaking fuel injector or multiple. We'll know at that point that all the coils are good. But again, I ohm tested them. I checked the boots on them because I have them out again. I forgot to check that last time. There's no cracks in the boots. These are all OEM grade coils or Denso. So I'm assuming those are good. And I'm assuming these plugs, once clean, will be good because they look very recent. They have no rust on them whatsoever. They're very clean. I just want to see how this thing runs with the plugs clean. If it runs a lot better, then I think we know we've got an issue with this thing running way too rich. Maybe it's the fuel pressure regulator. Another thing I'm going to check right now is I'm going to pull out the PCV, which is right here on the back valve cover, and see if that thing, if it still rattles or if it's totally clogged up. But one thing's for sure, we've got an issue with this thing running way too rich, and I think that's what's causing it to run the way it's running, and not a valve adjustment. All right, I cleaned the plugs the best I could. They're probably still need to be replaced, but they're not soaked in fuel anymore. Everything's reinstalled, coils, plugs. Oh, I gotta reconnect the battery. I figured I'd also kind of blank everything out, reset it while I was doing all that, because I also changed the PCV. Can figure this thing again. I don't know what values the computer was sending out, making it run so rich and having the thing sucking in so much air. So we get the plugs clean, ECU reset. Let's see what happens. Not sure at this point. This vehicle has thrown enough curveballs at me that I tend not to get too optimistic, but in theory it should run better, at least for a minute, until those plugs get soaked again. Oh yeah, I mean, that's, nope, still running like garbage. You can't even accelerate it. Look, it's like I did nothing. It's like I did absolutely nothing. Okay, so I've taken a few days off from the Pilot. I've had some other things to do, but the last thing I figured out when I was messing around with it, and you may remember at the beginning of this video, I showed myself unplugging these 3 ignition coils at the front of the engine, and there was no change in the way it was running. At the time, I figured it was probably because it was running so poorly, you couldn't even tell the difference when you unplugged the ignition coils and how it was running, because it was barely running at all. Now, later on, I ended up taking out all 6 ignition coils, and I ohm tested them, and they all showed as working. They all appear to be in good condition. There's no cracks in the boots. So I assume all the coils are good. But later on, I kept thinking about how I unplugged these 3 coils, and it had no change in the way it ran. So I did that test again, except the next time I went to the back of the engine as well. And when I got to this cylinder back here, and I unplugged it, the engine immediately stalled out. And I said, well, that's strange. That's obviously what should happen when you disconnect a working ignition coil, versus when you disconnect ones that are not working, there should be no change. So I tried it again, same result. And I disconnected this one in the middle, and it stayed running just fine. disconnected this one, and it stalled out. So I'm gonna show you real quick what I mean. So I'm gonna go ahead and fire this up. Now it's gonna be really loud, the hissing, because I've got the snorkel off of the throttle body for the air filter. So do your best to ignore that. Now watch, I'm gonna remove that connector. No change in the way it's running. This connector, no change in the way it's running. This connector, so 3 ignition coils disconnected, still running the same way. Now I'm gonna remove this connector at the back and watch this. Right away, stalls out. Let me plug that back in. And I'm going to show you, I'm leaving these 3 disconnected. Fires right up. Running poorly like it was before, but that's with 3 cylinders, with 3 ignition coils disconnected. Now, I'm gonna go back here. I apologize to you headphone users with that terrible hissing. You can see I have that ignition coil dead center in the back of the engine disconnected. No change. Now I'm gonna go for the one at the back right of the engine. I don't know the firing order off the top of my head on these pilots, but you can see the second I disconnected that, it stalled out. So the only 2 cylinders you would think that are firing, apparently, and probably the reason this is running so rough is that it's only running on 2 cylinders, these 2 back here, and the other 4 are not firing, which is strange because I had stored codes on this. To be honest, I don't quite remember if I ever had them as active codes, but I had stored codes for all 6 cylinders misfiring. Now, the reason that's somewhat not strange is these older Hondas, when they have misfire issues, even if it's 1 coil, for example, a lot of times it fools the ECU and the engine thinks all 6 cylinders are misfiring, which makes it even harder to chase down misfires in these engines. So more than once, looking at my scan tool, this has had 6 cylinder misfires showing, all 6. And I keep getting the P1399, which is just a random misfire code. But it would seem that this is running so poorly because it's only running on 2 cylinders. After I did this, what I did, my first assumption was, wow, you know, back to the basics. Clearly my ohm test was inaccurate. I've got 4 ignition coils that are bad. I took the 2 in the back that I thought were good on this cylinder and this cylinder, and I moved them up here, swapped the ones up here back there, repeated that test I just showed you. No change. If I disconnected the coils that I had swapped from here to the back, at those back 2 cylinders, it would stall out. The other 4, it would run the same way. Then I thought, okay, well, maybe it's the spark plugs. Maybe these 2 spark plugs are good and the rest are really bad. Even though they all look the same, I said I might as well try it. So I moved the spark plugs from these 2 cylinders up to the front and moved the 2 from up here back there. Same result. When I disconnected these 2 coils, it would stall out, or again, 1 at a time, doesn't matter. So what I knew at that point, it wasn't the plugs. I knew at that point it wasn't the ignition coils. A lot of you are probably already thinking it's got to be 4 dead cylinders or a serious issue with this engine. Well, so I did a compression test, which you'll see right now. All right, so I'm just going to give you a demonstration so you can see what I mean regarding this 250 compression. Let me make sure I've got this thing in there nice and snug. I do. All the other spark plugs are out as they should be. And again, I've tried 2 different, and they're 2 different brand compression gauges. I'm getting the same result. Have the throttle to the floor. What we got?
255 or yeah.
Yeah, about 250. That's what I get every time. And again, I've tried 2 different gauges, so I don't know why the now One thing that can cause compression that high is carbon buildup in the intake. It's certainly possible. One thing I suspect is causing it is there's probably a lot of fuel, because I think the issue with this engine at this point is either injectors or an injector, or the fuel pressure regulator, or the fuel pump. Okay, so welcome back. Now, I didn't show me testing all 6 cylinders in that clip, but all 6 cylinders, and I tried it multiple times with 2 separate compression testers, because I thought maybe one of them was broken, maybe I had dropped the gauge and it messed something up. I tested 2 different compression testers, and I did the test multiple times. Every time I got 250 psi out of each cylinder. Now, the good news about that is you want to see all your cylinders across the board being the same psi roughly. That means they're all in the same condition. If you have one that was an anomaly that was much lower, then you would suspect there's an issue with that cylinder. They're all the same, and usually the reason for those elevated compression numbers is excessive fuel being dumped into the engine or carbon buildup. And we know for a fact this is excessive fuel dumped into it, because when I pulled those spark plugs out, they're soaked in fuel. So that most likely explains the elevated compression numbers. Those don't concern me too much. You can tell just when you crank this thing over, it's got plenty of compression. The way it's sucking in air so violently, those things wouldn't be happening if this engine had bad compression. It's only got 130,000 miles. It's a one-owner, dealer-maintained, religiously serviced vehicle, despite its cosmetic appearance. So I have no doubt this engine has good compression. The compression test says so. The other ways that the engine acts say so. So it's strange that only 2 of these cylinders appear to be actually firing. Very, very confusing situation. So what does this leave me to do at this point? The only thing I haven't done yet, and I would do it right now, but all the auto parts stores are closed, is a fuel pressure test. I used to have one of those gauges you screw onto the fuel rail. I can't find it anywhere. So tomorrow I'll go out, buy another gauge, I'll screw it onto the fuel rail, and I'll see what the fuel pressure is. Now, I could just test it, push on the little thing and see how much pressure comes out of the rail, but I want to get an actual gauge reading. Because if you remember me saying earlier in the video, I had very high fuel trims when I had the live data going on this Pilot. They were positive 40 when they should be plus or minus 10. So way too high, usually a sign of low fuel pressure or a fuel pressure issue. So the next thing I'm going to do, and this will be in the next video, is I'm going to do a fuel pressure test. If we have low fuel pressure, then we have 3 potential issues. We either have a problem with the fuel pressure regulator, we could have a problem with the injectors, or we could have a problem with the fuel pump. Now, in order to get to the fuel pressure regulator, I have to take off this intake plenum. So while I'm there, I might as well change the injectors. I'm going to get all those parts at the junkyard. A lot of you are not going to like to hear that, but I'm not going to spend $100-something on a new OEM fuel pressure regulator. I'm not going to spend God knows how much on 6 injectors. That Pilot that I pulled the throttle body off of at the junkyard was a run and drive vehicle. We know it was going down the road and going well enough that it was able to get into an accident at a high rate of speed. So we have to assume at least most of those injectors are working, and let's be honest, they probably all work just fine. The fuel pressure regulator was working as well. So I'm going to put those junkyard parts in, the 6 injectors and the fuel pressure regulator, while I have this plenum off. If there's a fuel pressure issue, we'll see if it's running better at that point. If it's not, then I have to go to the fuel pump. The good news about that is it's underneath the back seat. It's a piece of cake to get to. Could be a bad pump. It's on its way out, putting out low fuel pressure. That's the next step. And from there, we'll see. Hopefully at that point I've got this solved. It doesn't really explain these 2 cylinders being the only ones that seem to be firing. Could be an ECU problem. It's causing only these 2 cylinders to fire. And it's causing this thing to go haywire with air control valve sucking in so much air and this thing dumping so much fuel. And some of you might say, change the air control valve. Well, I've tested this on my multimeter. It works. And if you remember, when I put the other throttle body in that had a different air control valve, we had the same situation where it's sucking way too much air. So I just think that's the car's computer trying to make this thing run right. And it's just saying more fuel, more air. And that might also explain the high fuel trims. So there's a number of things that could be going on here. I'm not throwing in the towel yet. I feel like I'm getting closer and closer, and I really don't have as much time invested in this thing as you may think. I only bought it a few days ago. I think this is day 5, and again, the past 2 days, including today, I haven't touched it. So the first 3 days I worked on it a little bit, did my diagnosing. I haven't spent that much in parts either, just this Egr valve. I'm going to return the throttle body, and besides the seat cushion, the engine cover, which I need, I think that's really all I've bought. So I've done plenty of diagnosing without spending a lot of money. If I had just dropped this off at a mechanic like the previous owner did, and they charged her $300 to go through this thing and try to figure out what was wrong with it, and they could not, that would suck. So I feel like we're getting closer. There's only so many things that can go wrong on this engine. This is an older Honda. It's almost 20 years old. I know these engines pretty well. They're also in the Saturn Views, these Honda 3.5s, with a collaboration that GM and Honda did. So I know these engines, even though I'm more of an American car guy. And we're getting to the point that we've checked so many things. There can only be so many more things before I get to the problem of this vehicle. And once I do, I have a few cosmetic things to take care of, and I'm going to have a excellent running, one owner, 130,000 mile Honda Pilot for very cheap money. It's going to be a great flip car. So please let me know in the comments what you think is going on, but make sure you've paid attention to this video and you know what I've tried so far. And hopefully together we'll figure out what's wrong with this Pilot, get it running great again, and get it back on the road. Could it be a clogged cat? Another thing I just thought of. I don't know. Could be, especially if it was misfiring for a while. It could have filled up with raw fuel and could be causing it to run the way it's running. So let me know what you think, guys. Thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for the next one.